only 10% of A/B tests tied to revenue are actually winning, and only 20% of tests overall, any type of test, are winning. So what does it mean? It means 80 to 90% of the A/B tests that companies run are flopping. They don't work.
This episode is brought to you by Warmly. Warmly is an AI-powered GTM assistant that helps your outbound team stop wasting time and start targeting the right people at the right time. Here's the play. Your SDRs open LinkedIn, and instead of cold scrolling, they get real-time signals like who is researching solutions like yours, who just switched jobs, or who recently viewed your site. No CRM updates, no lead lists, just useful context surfaced where they already work. If you're doing outbound in 2025 and not using Warmly, you are behind. Try it for free at www.warmly.ai. In this episode of the GTM Engineering Podcast, I talked to Casey Hill, CMO at DoWhatWorks, a platform that uncovers A/B tests running on the web, shows which variants win, and helps teams stop guessing and start testing smarter. Casey and I unpacked a big, uncomfortable truth. Most A/B tests fail. According to Optimizely's own data, 80 to 90% of experiments either lose or show no impact. So why do we keep running them? Casey walks through the flawed incentives, broken processes, and blind copycat behavior driving that waste, and what better looks like. We dig into why customer logo bars routinely lose in split tests, why most social proof lacks actual proof, and how simple reassurance subtext like "no credit card required" often outperforms clever CTAs. Casey also shares a practical framework for testing with a unified variable set, anchoring experiments to real user behavior, not stakeholder hunches. If you're on a growth or GTM team, this episode will challenge how you think about experimentation and show you how to build a smarter, data-backed approach that actually drives results. Here's my conversation with Casey. Casey, welcome.
Thanks for having me, George. Excited to be here.
So I've been following you for a while, and I don't know why, but I positioned you in my mind as someone who knows what works and what doesn't, and who also does all these like crazy experiments, like spending 2.5 hours on a Saturday to comment on other people's posts on LinkedIn just to see if there is something there. So I'm excited to have you here with me. And we were discussing the format before we start, recording. The first question or section is regarding trends, and so we will kick it off there. What's a trend that you see right now, or before that? Sorry, let me just backtrack a bit, and let me just ask first for people who don't know, because you also have the nice hat there. What DoWhatWorks is and what you guys do, and then I guess we can start talking about the trend that you see right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, George. And that LinkedIn experiment was an interesting one. We'll unpack that some other time. But my name's Casey. I'm the CMO at DoWhatWorks. We have a technology that can look and see split tests from any brand on the web. So I joined this company about 2 months ago. It's kind of a dream situation. The way it essentially works, in case people are curious, because when I first heard about this, I was skeptical. I was like, wait, is this like black hat? Like, are we cooking? We're not cooking. We're not pixeling. We're not putting anything on websites. We're using public data. So when people run split tests, it's actually public data. We have a crawler that crawls through the web, looks at public data, tracks what actually is being tested on those pages. And then we have a human research team that validates, adds whatever the brand favors, whatever the brand chooses to keep in terms of what version of a split test. They add that to a database. And then we have a huge database of tens of thousands of tests segmented by industry, segmented obviously by specific company, what page type, all these different millions of pieces of metadata. So it's a really, really neat technology and unique kind of platform that is used by lots of Fortune 100 and some of the largest companies in the world to essentially run better split tests, to run more data-informed tests.
Okay, that makes sense. They can, I guess, is it just for like it serves mostly as a swipe file, or you can run the tests like through DoWhatWorks?
Yeah, so the database itself, it's not really a swipe file, but it's a segmentable database. So I could say, show me SaaS companies who are testing pricing page tiers. And it will say, okay, here's 8,000 tests that were run
Hmm.
on tiers. And you can then start saying, show me specifically what Shopify, this company did, and it will show you those tests. So there's a whole visualization within the database of like side by side what the tests look like, what specifically is being tested, how long the test ran, how much traffic went to each version, and ultimately what won. On top of that, we have a research team that acts in a kind of like agency style capacity, which can put together wireframes, et cetera. But we don't do any of the implementation. So whatever you use, whether you use Webflow, Optimizely, Adobe Target, whatever your digital experience platform, you implement it. We're just providing the research and data and insights in kind of a segmentable format. And we also are only serving top of the funnel. So we're, again, because we're working on public data, we're not like 3 steps into the flow. So we're not auditing internal processes. Like there's another company, I'm forgetting their name, called like maybe Pageflow or something. And theirs is basically like a swipe file of like the implementation processes. We're only looking high level. They ran an A/B test. They tested the button saying, start free trial or get started free. And we're looking at that test and we're seeing which version the company kept. And then we're comparing that against thousands of other companies that ran similar tests to provide that data. Or sometimes companies just want to track their competitors, to be candid. They're like, I would just love to do know what my top 4 competitors are doing, and we can provide that insight to them as well.
That's the first time I hear. I've never heard of such a product before. I don't know if you have, but I haven't. So that's interesting. So, want to start with the trend that you see right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a really interesting trend that obviously kind of connects to this conversation, which is around A/B testing. So Optimizely put out a huge state of the industry report, and they basically said that 10% of A/B tests tied to revenue, only 10% of A/B tests tied to revenue are actually winning, and only 20% of tests overall, any type of test, are winning. So what does it mean? It means 80 to 90% of the A/B tests that companies run are flopping. They don't work. And if we go even beyond the scale of A/B tests and we talk about like website overhauls, in my 15 years in this industry, I can't tell you how many times I've seen the following process. Company is like, we need to overhaul our website. It's old, maybe a new VP or CMO comes in. They go hire an expensive agency. There's a huge committee of dozens of people. Everyone's throwing out their opinions. Halfway through the process, an executive comes in and says, wait, why we're not talking about AI enough? Like we need more AI. And then a product person comes in and they say, we're doing a big launch. You need to have more of this. The culmination is 1 quarter, 2 quarters get spent, 6 figures get spent on this huge overhaul. They launch it, and then there's no meaningful difference. And meanwhile, there's massive incentives across the team to show that there's a difference. Everyone is scrambling to try to massage the data in a way that makes it seem like it's winning because they spent so much time and resources. The VP doesn't want to get fired, right? So what we're finding is the fundamental way that people approach A/B testing, split testing, website overhauls right now has several fundamental flaws. It's based on a lot of guesswork. It's based on a lot of personal opinions. It's sometimes based on anecdotal opinions, advice that was really good best practice 5 years ago, but is not best practice anymore. And as a byproduct, companies are wasting a tremendous amount of money and resources testing things that don't move the needle in any meaningful way. So I think at a high level, that is one of the major problems or hurdles that we have as a space. So I think there's a couple ways we can think about meaningfully addressing or approaching that problem. I think one of the first ones is when looking at split testing or A/B testing, any changes you make on a page, you want them to boil up to a central objective. There should be a reason or rationale for why stuff is being done. So let me explain. Let's say you want to change your pricing page. You want to increase conversions. A better way to do it than what normally happens is to look at your heat mapping. So this is the ideal way. Look at your heat mapping and see what's happening. Let's say you see that people actually don't linger super long on your main above the fold on your main pricing tiles. They start scrolling. They're scrolling. What's the signal to me? The signal is there's something they want to know and they're not finding it. They're not finding it in your main tile, so they're digging on your pricing page. You don't want them digging on your pricing page. So any changes you make now are things that should be clarification to bring people to stay on those central tiles. Maybe I'm going to add reassurance text and say no credit card required. Maybe I'm going to try to highlight certain features in a different way. But every change I do should speak to that problem. What was the problem? They were leaving. They're scrolling down. There's something that isn't being answered. And so that mentality is very different from a way that a lot of people approach it today. The other thing I'll say is there's a couple fundamental challenges. Like when someone's doing a website revamp, this is something I've seen many times. Part of it is they say, we're going to do our research. We're going to do our research. So they go to the main incumbents' websites and they check out the main incumbents. Now, at face value, you might be like, hey, Casey, like you're saying don't check out competitors. I thought that's what your whole platform does is check out competitors. Let me explain. There's nuance here. When you do it ad hoc like that, what happens is, and we've seen this firsthand, you land on a major competitor, you look at their website, you have no idea if they're in an active test. You could get a split test that is only being sent to 5% of their traffic that is an off the wall split test. It's converting at 1% versus their normal 4%. You have no idea. You show up on a Wednesday at 9 a.m., you get that split test, you come back to your team and you say, well, if it's good enough for insert big company, it's good enough for us, right? And you just copied a losing test. And we saw a big Monday.com competitor do exactly this. They copied a losing version of the test. So you want to be very careful when you're ad hoc blindly copying competitors. That's where something like DoWhatWorks is really valuable because DoWhatWorks is telling you not just that they're testing, they're telling you what version won in the test and they're telling you at scale. So it is good to use data to inform your decisions. Be very careful about doing it in an ad hoc way. So I'd say at a high level, the way that you kind of speak to this problem is number one, you build towards a central objective. We call a unified variable set. You have a unified variable set, which essentially means that there's a core thing you're trying to do. And then when you're doing your research process, when you're trying to be data informed, you want to make sure that you do that in a smart way. I think those two pillars are two of the starting points of how you try to run better A/B testing.
Would you say that like marketing or growth teams, I guess mostly growth teams, because mostly growth teams and maybe GTM teams nowadays run these tests. Are they pushed in a way to run these tests because that's what they are supposed to do? That's part of the job description. But that then, because of some of the reasons you mentioned, leads to like burning money and cash, while you could be like in certain cases, I guess you shouldn't have run this test like to begin with, right? So, but would you say that it's an expectation for them to run these tests and thus they run them, and in most cases, yeah, it leads to waste?
Yeah, the first answer to that is 100% yes. There's many teams who, in that web optimization space, are literally tracked on volume of tests they run, which is obviously a horrible metric, right? Like we want to see meaningful changes across the page. It should be based on some downstream impact. You shouldn't just be, there should be no KPIs within your organization like that are purely based on volume, or otherwise you're incentivizing the wrong thing. So 100%, there's a challenge there. What I'll say is, I've worked with a lot of startups in my life. If you're a startup, one of the things that you're often going to find is that your traffic is very inconsistent. So you have spikes, right? It's like you have this very low baseline and then you do something, you get featured and you see a spike and then it goes back down and then you see a spike and it goes back down. If you're doing that, you want to be very careful when you run A/B tests because the traffic that you drive can have completely different intent levels. One group heard about you on a podcast. One group came from a viral social post. And one group, you met them in person and you talked to them at an event. Hugely different levels of context and intent signals across those different groups. So you want to be careful if you have a very low baseline and you're just seeing spikes, you want to make sure your tests are testing across the same cohorts of people, right? It is typically ideal. I don't like throwing out a specific number because the number can be a little bit of an arbitrary. Like there's a lot of people that will say if you don't have at least 5,000 hits a month, don't A/B test. Like I've heard that said before. I don't like having, I think that's a somewhat arbitrary number. What I would advise instead is for people to look at the continuity and consistency. Meaning, if you have, say, only 2,000 to 2,500 hits, but it comes from a very consistent source, that's your baseline. That comes from your SEO, or that comes from some consistent traffic source, maybe even paid ads if you're consistently running them month by month. That, I would say, is still sufficient for us to be able to get a signal on a monthly basis. But if your baseline is 50, 100 hits, and then you see big spikes of 5,000, 10,000, that's when you need to be a little bit careful.
Okay, that makes sense. I would like to shift gears a bit. The second thing I'm going to ask is, this podcast is all about like tactics, strategies, growth plays that drive actual impact. Okay, and I would like to ask if you at Do What Works have run any of like these experiments that you can share with us, or you track all these experiments run by other companies, um, and I would like to hear one or two maybe of these experiments, along with like what you make out of them, like what insights we can take for people who are listening to this, results, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So I'll maybe share some of the stuff that surprised me the most because I've been in this space for a long time. And there was definitely, when I looked at the data, there was some stuff that totally made sense. So, like the stuff like clarity, like clear CTAs outperform CTAs that are more like start exploring, like saying start, get your demo or start free trial outperforms like start exploring or some sort of like more that stuff's expected, right? I saw those. I'm like, okay, yeah, clear is better. That makes sense. One that surprised me was that customer logos lose in the vast majority of direct A/B tests, and we see it across so many different companies from Square, Dropbox, Asana. Like, there's tons that have tested this, and so 80% of the top 100 B2B SaaS companies have logo bars right on their website. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Like, why are so many companies doing a losing thing? I think it stems from a couple different factors. I think first is I think it's something that very few people test. So when they test it head to head, they find that it's losing, but most people don't test it at all. So I think there's this gap. I think that when it comes to customer logos, though, it's a really interesting conversation around social proof. And one of the things that's problematic is that logos inherently lack context, right? So you don't know, like most people, they just have a set of scrolling logos. You can't click into them. There's no ability to engage. There's no ability to validate. Oh, you said you work with State Farm. Do you work with the massive multinational corporation, or do you work with one small branch in North Dakota that has two people in it? We have no ability to get that context, right? And so I think that is fundamentally something that just doesn't build a lot of trust. People just scroll right past it. There's no inherent engagement, right? So what should you do instead? There's a couple of companies that have had really clever spins on this. So one I covered recently is a company called Clay. What Clay does is they show the logos, but they also have case study written underneath, and you can actually click into case studies from the logos. They've taken something that is kind of just a flat element and they've given it that aspect of trust. I think that's smart. So I like how they've done it. Another one called Seven Shifts, which I shared recently, they have it tabbed by industry. So you're still just looking at logos, but there's some sense of affinity when you're like for your specific business type, right? So you can segment out and they can click through those tabs. So I also think that is a smart approach or play. Then there's some interesting cases like Asana tested out of logos, removed them completely. But then when they did a website revamp, they returned the logos. They used fewer, but they specifically focused on, I think their current headline, if you guys go to the website, says something to the effect of like used by over 50% or 80%, I don't remember the percentage, of Fortune 100 companies. And the whole revamp of the website was all around enterprise. Their whole thing is around enterprise security and all the different compliances. And so they did use logos, but they use it in a very specific context to speak to a central objective. So, what did I say at the beginning of the call? Everything you do should speak to a central objective. When Asana did the revamp, that central objective is we want to target more of the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100, the largest organizations. That's our sweet spot. That's our growth lever. That's what they've been pushing. If you read, their investor reports, like they're trying to grow in that sector. So again, in all three of these examples, they're taking the conventional element and they're twisting it just a little bit to get more impact, right? I think beyond that, we can extrapolate on a lot of other things like, you can do testimonials, but not testimonials in a way that most people do it, where you just say like, this company is great or increase revenue by 50%. Do it in a way that has real relatable storytelling and context. Like, hey, we're at 100 demos. We moved to 240 demos within the first 2 quarters from implementing this process. And we even had to hire an extra AE to handle this new inbound volume. That conversation feels a lot more relatable and authentic than just throwing out random percentages or random top line numbers. So I won't go down the rabbit hole on this, but I think that's one test that was very interesting, is that customer logos in the conventional way by themselves um, don't seem to land. Another one that I'll share that's really small, this is just a really quick one, but reassurance subtext seems to win at a very high percentage. So what is reassurance subtext? Reassurance subtext means below your start free trial, you say something like no credit card required, free forever. There's still some ambiguity in the space around if I start a trial, is it actually going to be free? Right? And so adding that simple thing, couple little letters there could increase multiple percentage points the lift that you receive. And you can look at Monday.com implements this. You can look at Shopify on their pricing page implements this. Active Campaign on their homepage implements this. Tons of companies have recently tested into this, and they're showing really strong results and lift from that very basic change. So those are two examples for you.
I think the logos one is, the thing is, logos are considered like table stakes. You can't have a website without logos. In fact, like for our new agency, even though we already have pipeline, but like one of the first things to do is, okay, but we've worked with so many companies in the past, we have to feature some of these companies, right? But I agree with you because somewhere like there, it's easy to lose context and like when you see I see for example examples of companies that feature logos of like in most cases their biggest customers, which makes sense, like you're proud, you want to feature them and whatnot. But then when you say that we are here to serve small businesses and whatnot, how can a small business relate to like this logo like pack that you have there? I get it. Like you want to showcase your strongest, your biggest customers, but I agree with you. Like we have to think a bit like deeper about the use of logos. And I also saw a post or a discussion, I guess, uh, the other day on LinkedIn regarding logos on pricing pages. What are your thoughts on that? Like, having specific logos under each pricing plan and whatnot. In your experience or based on data you have, does that work or not so much? Like, it doesn't drive as much impact?
Yeah, I saw that. I think in general it doesn't work. I mean, I can share lots of tests with people. Again, I mentioned Dropbox. I think ran it on their pricing page specifically. I think I published that test like last month at some point. There's a bunch of examples where it doesn't work. I mean, I think also there's some cases where it actively will detract or actively it takes up real estate and space. There's other cases with a lot of stuff where it's just neutral. There's not really like a meaningful signal one way or another. Um, Usually on pricing pages, what we see, again, like let's just look strictly at the data. What we see is people add in a logo bar beneath their plan tiers. They add in a logo bar at the top, right, like before people get to it. And when they A/B test that, they always tend to not stay with it, and they always tend to remove it. So some of this is interpretive, right? Like we don't have a lens. Like I don't have a personal hotline to Dropbox and to Salesforce and to HubSpot and all these companies that are running these tests. Here's what I can see. They put it on their page, they run an A/B test for 3 months, they remove it. When I look at that at scale, and you look at, say, like hundreds and hundreds of tests, and you see an 88% of people that test it remove it, I'm reading into that signal there's something problematic that is happening, right? Like the percentages are strong enough and the indicators are strong enough that it seems clear to me that they're not causing a rise in conversion. And we can speculate. I mean, obviously, I have my opinions on why that might be, and it could depend on where they put it on the page, obviously, can also have an impact. But I think you hit the nail on the head with your analysis. I also think the problem with logos also is that you can inadvertently turn people off with it's the same thing with customer proof. You have to be very careful. I saw a website, just taking a slight segue, but I'll get back to the point. I saw a website that said our newsletter, we generated like 1.2 million for our newsletters last month. And I kind of was like sitting with that statement for a second. And I was like, that makes you seem really small. Like you only generated 1.2 million across all your customers. Like that seemed like their intent was for that to make them seem larger, but it did the opposite. So I think with customer proof, you have to be really, really careful, right? Like if you include stars and you say, but then it says of 16 reviews, ooh, only 16 reviews, like that seems very small, right? Like there's a whole e-commerce world to this as well. But my point here is that when you use customer proof statements, inadvertently, you can also isolate people. There's also this idea of expected. I was talking with a Fortune 100 team last week, and one of the things they said to me about this made a ton of sense, which is they basically said, look, we realize that people expect, like, we're one of the largest companies in the world. People expect companies like Apple, companies like Microsoft to have worked with all the biggest companies. Like, what is the utility for me as Apple or Microsoft to go say that I work with top companies? It's already the expectation. And so one of the reasons they speculated, this company speculated that their logos bar didn't work is because it was already the expectation. So whatever they add, it's like that's kind of filler. And in some ways, it again has the risk factor of someone sees like a name that doesn't quite make sense, or they only see like four logos with like, oh, that's weird. Why would they include that? So I just think that if you're going to use customer proof, I'm absolutely for social proof. I think social proof is good. I do think at the same note, most people do it wrong. Most people do it in a way that underplays. Most people do it in a way that feels like filler. Most people do a testimonial in a way that's just like, I loved working with this team. It was such a great experience. And it's just filler. Like no one reads like I loved working with this team put out on the website of the company and it's like, "Oh wow." Like that changes my mind. What they do think though is like a relatable person in the same role as them navigating through a similar journey and getting a specific result they want. Okay, that's interesting because it's specific, it's contextualized, it's relatable to them and their function, and there's real data that seems like anyone can go on their website and say, I worked with this company and increased, by our XYZ by 190%. So it's just it's just a stat in the air versus contextualizing it with very specific numbers. Like I said, we went from X to Y demos, like the before and after transition. So I digress, but
Yeah, you know how it goes. I mean, marketers like blank statements, and many of these things are just expectations, right? Like, well, we need to have some stats and we need to have some phases of customers and testimonials, even if they like. Another thing I've seen is like when they have different use case pages, and they will have testimonials, but they will be the same. Just give me one testimonial that's like relevant to this use case, and even if you don't have many, just feature one. It's enough, as long as it's relevant, right? So I think we need to work on that. So the format, as I said before we start the recording, is one trend, one growth tactic or experiment, and one problem. But I guess we covered a couple of problems. I don't know if you have anything else that GTM teams face nowadays. Is there anything that comes to mind?
yeah, I mean, look, we could we could spend hours and unpack lots of things that go to market teams face. I would say one thing I'll say to loop into, like on a slightly different topic, but I'll just maybe leave people with. We talked in the very beginning about LinkedIn and the experiment I did, essentially looking at comments, right? I will I'll try to be as brief and concise here as possible because there's so much that you can unpack. But here's what I'll say about LinkedIn. Two main things. Number one is there is a velocity component to LinkedIn that is very hard to avoid. I right now I've done about 4 million views over the last month. Of those, 50% of those views come from two very viral posts, right? One of them, the LinkedIn comment one itself, and another one about Clay and their logos. The one that was the post around Clay was my third post of the day and was posted at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Both of those are like horrible best practices, right? Typically, that's what we've all heard, right? Like you don't post right when people are getting off of work, and you certainly don't post 3 times in a day. What I have found is that the algorithm, the way that it works, yes, you can cannibalize views. First off, I'm not going to say you can't cannibalize views, but there is a certain amount of luck to who engages with your content. One of the major ways I've seen my content go viral, and I've been studying this very carefully for a lot of years, is high profile people comment or engage, which then exposes it to their networks. And then there's this ripple effect. You can't consistently know when a top VC or a top CEO or a top CMO is going to engage on your content. So even if your post is the third post of the day, in the case, if you're posting valuable content, which I like to think hopefully I am, in the case of that Clay post, that went on to get, whatever it is, close to 1 million views. And as a byproduct of the people that engage with it and that cycle that started. So I don't want to encourage people to spam and just put out lots of low quality content. But what I will say is oftentimes I have found that when I'm shipping a higher volume of content, I have more shots on goal and I have more wins. So take that for what you will. That's my personal experience. The second thing is if you care directly about business outcomes, then there's one thing that's very important, which is you should be adding CTAs to your content to drive that top of funnel attention into your newsletter. That one viral post from Clay gave us a 30% bump in our newsletter subscribers. It was incredible. And we only had on that one comment, I think we had 15,000 views. So a tiny, tiny fraction of the total post, but 15,000 views was still enough to drive hundreds and hundreds of subscribers and move that attention down the funnel. So think thoughtfully around A, how you ship and your velocity, but second, make sure that you're commenting, make sure that you're adding CTAs on your content to capitalize on that momentum, and then also write thoughtful comments on people in your ICP. So like I have a short list in my head of people that I know speak to my ICP and also have wide reach. So I think in my head, I'm like Jason Lemkin, Kyle Poyer, Amanda Zhu. Like I have all of this short list, right, of who these folks are. And I purposely try to engage with that content as much as possible because number one, they have wide reach. So a comment on one of those posts that's really thoughtful can get 10, 20, whatever thousand views. But number two, I know my audience is there. People look and they're like, well, my post reach is small. Like I'm not getting in front of the right people. Well, go to the people who speak to the right people and be very thoughtful and engaged. It's a dual win. If you ever want to collaborate or you ever want to do stuff with them, you now are building name recognition, which is very valuable. I ignore 99% of the inbound that comes to me, but people who engage in my content, I recognize. I'm like, oh, I've seen that person. They've commented on a dozen of my posts. So that's the way to break through the noise with folks. And on top of that, it's not just about the person who you're commenting with. It's about the whole audience that exists on that post that then 20,000 people in your ICP see that comment. So I think that's just a few. Again, we could spend hours talking about LinkedIn, but that's a few thoughts for folks.
Thank you. After reading this post you did on the experiment you ran, like with comments on LinkedIn the other day, I told one of my people from my team that I'm going to do that, but with messages, because I've seen, and there is a discussion around that messages, it's a signal, and I've experienced that myself. Like I may not get an engagement from someone for a while, and then they will send me something, or I will send them something on LinkedIn, and then the other day or the next time I will log in, boom, they are there on my feed, like the first post, and I'm like, yeah, that's, there is something here, right? And so I've started like with purpose, obviously, reaching out to people, or like not selling them anything, or like reaching out to promote something, but just say hi or check what they are up to, and just like congratulate them, whatever, just connect, right? And I think that as I see their content, they see my content too, right? And I get some positive signals. And in fact, I was watching an interview the other day about that. And it seems that messages, I can't prove that, I don't have data, but messages seem to be, like a signal for engagement. And like, I don't know if you had any experiences
It,
with that, but
yeah. So here's my thoughts on it. I think it absolutely can be a way to open up conversations and doors, but I have a couple strong caveats to the conversation. Number one is if you can lead with value, right? Like I noted before, like I get so much. If I showed you guys my inbox on LinkedIn is absolutely insane. I get so many people that are soliciting services, so many people that say, "Oh, I love this content," and it's so much noise. I have to ignore the vast majority of it because it's just a distraction. But if you reach out to me and you say, "Hey, Casey, I thought that content was really interesting. I'd love to have you on the podcast," that is something that has value to me. I'm like, yeah, I'd like to talk to more people. I'd like to have my message in front of more people. There's inherent value in that conversation. Hopefully, there's valuable to the people who are receiving that message, but there's also value to me. So I think if you're going to reach out, one question I would always have in your head is value. How am I contributing value? And if you are struggling to find things, a simple way, I don't think this is as good as having them on your newsletter, podcast, or whatever, but a simple way is to share their stuff internally and then let them know. Just wanted to let you know I loved that analysis you did on XYZ. I shared that with my whole team, and then like something like that. And then no ask, of course, right? That's at least like well received. Someone will be like, "Oh, thank you." Like you often from high profile people aren't going to get a effusive like long conversation, but at least you open the door. Like they say like, "Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Glad it was valuable." Like whatever. Same thing. I will almost always respond to those kind of messages. Like, yeah, glad you liked it. Glad it was helpful. And then sometimes those people might follow up with a question. I was curious though, like in XYZ use case, how would this work? And I'll be honest, I can't always respond because there's a lot of volume. But occasionally, if it seems like a person who's in the right field or there's some like kind of relevance, we'll start that back and forth rift. And now that person has opened that conversation. So I would definitely say messaging is great, but try to be value added. And wherever possible, try to build name recognition first. So one of the things I've opened up a lot of like influencer doors in my career and opened up a lot of collaborations. And what I used to do going way back, like 6, 7 years when I first started this is before I did any outreach to a high profile person, I spent multiple weeks just engaging with all their content. I wanted, when that message hit their inbox, I wanted them to recognize Casey's name and be like, oh, that's Casey. I've seen him. Like, even if it's like vague, like they're just like in the back of their mind, LinkedIn tends to be small enough where if you're showing up in a consistent way and not like the AI comments, like even if you're not doing an AI comment, if you're just hopping on to be like, totally agree, sounds great, like it sounds like an AI comment. So what I mean is like
Yeah.
real nuance, add a personal experience you've had, ask a follow up, share an article, do something that adds real nuance to the conversation. If you do that consistently for a couple weeks before, I think you will get much better utility and return. So my summation of all of this is absolutely send messages to people. But if you create a short list of say 30 folks you'd really love to open conversations with, this is kind of like an ABM strategy. Go through, spend some time engaging consistently with all of those people. Do that for a little bit of duration of time, and then reach out with a value add outreach that has some actual context. And by the way, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a specific asset that you own, newsletter, whatever. Sometimes it's also connecting people, right? I've still seen tons of value for that. You connect them to a media outlet, you connect them to a potential customer, you connect them like there's lots of ways you can add value to folks. But I think that approach will ultimately provide a lot more impact for you.
I agree with you. And I think that's one of the reasons why your profile, as far as I see it, is at an inflection point. Because a couple of years ago, when we first connected, it wasn't like that. I mean, you were doing really interesting things and saying very interesting things and important things back then. But it wasn't like I don't remember seeing so much traction back then. Now I think it's exploding, and there is a reason for that. Like you've been doing that consistently for quite some time, and so it makes sense that, like people not just recognize you, but also when you speak, they listen, right? So yeah.
And I
Uh yeah, please.
the one thing I'll just close loop on that too though, because I do want people to know this is that I think people sometimes think that the way that lift happens on LinkedIn is like this consistent, like I used to get 1,000 views a post and now I get 20,000 views a post. The majority of creators I work with, and myself included, don't work like that. So if I was to show you my profile right now, my last post I think got 7,000, 3,000 before that, 8,000, 2,000, 1,000, 500,000 and then 4,000. Like, and I mention this only because I think it's important for people not to get discouraged. If you're putting out content and you're getting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 views on a post, you absolutely can still have viral content, right? Like it's not a consistent. So while that baseline has massively lifted for me because I'm getting more and more of the 50,000 plus view posts, I still every single week will ship 3 to 4 posts that do under 10,000 views every single week. And every single week, I'll usually have one that's like totally flops, like gets like 1,000, 2,000 views. And so just wanted to leave people with that. Like, know that even if you have content that isn't knocking it out of the park, you absolutely still can change that curve if you just keep shipping stuff that is genuinely unique, genuinely valuable, shares personal experience, is data rich, all of those best practices.
Thank you. Thank you, Casey. We are marketers, so there has to be a call to action, or even, like, here's where you can find me. So what's the place for like folks if they want to connect with you to reach out, say hi, or if there is another call to action, now is the time to drop it.
Yeah, basically LinkedIn is a great place to follow insights. If you're curious about growth strategies, if you want to see this kind of building in public around all these different go-to-market channels, that is what I do. I share tests, I share personal things, experiments I'm running, what the data is, what wins, what loses. So go to LinkedIn, you can follow it there. If you're a mid-size enterprise organization and you're looking at kind of revamping your testing program and you want to do that via a data foundation, then go check out DoWhatWorks. That's essentially what we do. We cater to mid-market enterprise organizations that are looking to restructure their conversion rate optimization programs and have data as the foundation of their decision making. So that's dowhatworks.io. We'd love to have a conversation with folks who are in that camp.
By the way, one last thing I would like to ask before we close, which is like related to that, do you also offer services at Do What Works? Because it sounds to me that, like these folks know a lot about optimization, so there could be a services layer on top of like the software, but I'm just curious, really.
Yeah, absolutely there is. So there's the software, which is the database, but the majority of customers not only use a database, but they use our research team. And our research team does like rapid analysis and all sorts of different services where often a team will bring specific premises to us. So the dashboard is just like, okay, I want to track these 10 companies in my industry, or I want to track whatever specific, brands are relevant, and I can do that in a self-serve way, and you'll get updates when people are running tests, etc. But beyond that, a lot of teams are like, I really want to know if this new video is a good idea to put on this spot. Like, what data can you tell me about that? And before they go implement it and go run, again, that 90% of losing split test, they come to us with that question. And we can not only gather all the data specifically to that, but we can create a wireframe for them. This is how it could look. This is how. So there's absolutely a services arm to the organization as well.
That's great. That's a wrap. Casey, thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks for having me.